T.J. Hooker returns next week at this time. Now a special presentation.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. It's the nation's second longest running comic convention. It's Ithacon, April 22nd and 23rd at the campus center of Ithaca College. Tickets are just $20, $5 for kids 17 and under. Order tickets now at ithacon.org. Featured guests include the legendary Walt and Louise Simonson, DC comic vets Shelley and Philip Bond, Dean Haspiel, Mike Gold, the classic Spider-Man and Superman writer Roger Stern, Megaton Man's Dom Simpson, Star Trek's DS9 J.G. Hertzler, and many more. This year we'll have amazing comic publishers like Ahoy Comics, Dynamite, A Wave Blue World, and SHP. There'll be cosplay contests, panels, kids' activities, and more. Plus, Ithacon is offering swag bags for the first 200 attendees to buy tickets. These overstuffed swag bags offer over $30 value in comics, books, and more. Join us for Ithacon, April 22nd and 23rd at the campus center of Ithaca College. Order tickets now at ithacon.org. Welcome back, everybody. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. I've been thrilled, and I probably have said this the last couple of times Hitch has been on, but I've been really happy to get to know Bryan Hitch here on the podcast. It's always good to see you, Bryan. Welcome back.
Thanks, John. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. And hey, man, you guys at Ghost Machine have hit the ground running. This is a big debut month for Ghost Machine. All the first issues are coming out, and including them, your fine effort with Jeff, Redcoat, you and Jeff Johns, a really fun series. I assume that Jeff kind of put out concepts for all of you, and you guys got to choose whichever one, or how did you? Yeah, how did you guys get together on this?
It was a lot more organic than that. You can never quite put your finger on where something quite starts unless somebody said, "What if we do this?" But Redcoat seems to have gradually evolved out of various conversations Jeff and I had. I mean, the whole Ghost Machine thing started because he and Gary had been doing Geiger, and that had been very successful for them. And after, he just worked with Gary for best part of 20 years, and he's been working with, when he pretty much discovered Jay at DC, and so he and Jason having done the Three Jokers, wanted to carry on working together, and Rook was Jay's concept. Jay had Rook since he was a child, so it was kind of a lot of Jay's ideas for the kind of ideal book he'd like to do, based on his love of toys, modeling, Saturday morning cartoons, and certain types of science fiction and Star Wars and all of that. And all of that coalesced, and he had the visual for the figure and the masks and stuff. And then in talking to Jeff came up with the story for that. So there was an evolution from something Jay wanted to do. With Redcoat, Jeff and I had been talking about doing JSA for DC. But actually, for various reasons, that didn't happen. And I opted out after a while anyway. Because I just, I was going over to Marvel to do some other stuff, the Venom and whatnot, and I had the Superman job. So we came up with something that ultimately became Redcoat, but I can't remember exactly whether it was Jeff or me, honestly. So we've been talking about it for so long, because we did the 80-page giant preview story, which was, I suppose we actually started drawing. I started working on it, thinking about it almost 3 years ago. So I finished it gradually over the course of about 6 months, and the idea was we would do in a miniseries straight away, but I had the Venom and Ultimate Invasion, and Jeff had the Stargirl TV series and more stuff with Gary, 3 Jokers, and we just never got to it. But we never stopped talking about it, and it evolved very differently from how we originally conceived the story and the character, and it's become much more interesting for us in terms of the character's journey. But also in that time, over the last almost 2 years, we gradually built what's become Ghost Machine, because it's taken a long time to put it together, both in terms of building the physicality of the company for all of us, getting the business model, getting the business running, getting all of the, the stuff that makes it not just a concept of a business, but an actual business, an actual company, Ghost Machine Productions. And then getting, bringing in all the additional people that form the whole, because we're 20, 21, 22 people now all together in the company. And then actually building up to the launch in October, then building up to the preview book in January, and everybody's first issues. And so, yeah, you say hit the ground running, but actually it's been a very long run up. So it feels more to us like we're getting to sit back and just get on with it now, rather than all the running, because all the hard work in building the company's there. Now the snowball's rolling, and you just have to kind of keep it moving.
Understood. We've got some comments, and I want to post them. Just for people watching, I'm going to get to other projects that Bryan is involved in, but I do want to start off with Redcoat. It just came out a couple of weeks ago, or actually last week, now that I think of it. But Alex Savick joining us. Good to see you, Alex. He says, great to have met you at MegaCon, Bryan. See you at Fan Expo Philadelphia. You were just telling me you're going to be there.
I am indeed. So yeah, Jeff introduced me to Alex. He's one of those guys I grew up with as a kid, so it was really nice to go and say hello to him.
He's one of the best. No, I'm one of the first big creators that I got to meet, and he's been a longtime friend. So it's great that you're watching, Alex. We really appreciate that. So this is Simon Pure. That's Redcoat's name, and in fact,
yeah.
Even bring up his. I love that you guys are doing essentially the Who's Who kind of format, or Ohatmu for
exactly.
So yeah, there we go. So so tell me about this guy.
Well, Immortal Arsehole seems like a bit of a reduction, but I mean, Simon's an interesting character because he's never been cared about in his entire life, and we have a backstory from him which is developing, and we'll get to that in due course. But he's never been cared for by anybody, and he's never cared about anybody because nobody's ever modeled that behavior for him. So he's been entirely this thing that has to exist on his own. And before he became immortal, his existence was a survival on a day-to-day basis. And it's interesting when you put a character like that into a situation that he's in, where he's immortal. He may not be able to die, but he's still afraid of dying. But he's never yet learned actually how to live. He exists, but he has not ever embraced life and everything that it has to offer. So the question for us is, how long does it take for a man to learn from his mistakes? And it's always individual, because that's what your life is about. It started with a bit of a joke between Jeff and I when I said to him, I've learned from my mistakes and I can repeat them almost exactly. And that's somewhat the basis of Simon. Simon spends his life repeating his mistakes. But what started as originally a limited idea has developed so much for us now that we can't imagine telling the story in much less than 100 issues. So it's a very long-term commitment for us, and that's monthly as well. So it's the unorthodox journey towards being a hero, because the minute he becomes that hero for us, the story's over. That's the end of his story, because then it's predictable, I think. And so this is not Superman. This is not how Superman reacts to being in a difficult situation at all. And Simon, just although he can fight, he'd much rather run away from it and leave somebody else to die in his place, even though he knows he's going to get reborn. It's not painless. He doesn't enjoy the process, especially since every time he dies, he gets these flashbacks to his really quite awful childhood and upbringing in London. So there's a lot of story to tell with Simon. I mean, if you want sort of an example to liken it to that people can get behind in terms of understanding the concept to a point, and it's not, but it's a sort of a it's not the same thing, but it will give you an idea of what we mean when we talk about the character's journey and how it's never linear. It's always up and down. If you look at Bill Murray's character in Groundhog Day, you can see by the end of the film that he must have lived decades, if not centuries worth of those days to achieve what he achieves by the end. But his journey is, arrogant tosser who doesn't give a shit about anybody, to somebody who cares about absolutely everybody, and is completely selfless by the end of the film. But that's not a linear journey, because he, first of all, he doesn't believe what's happening to is happening to him. Then he has all the fun he can have. Then it gets boring and depressing and despairing, and then suddenly he starts to embrace the possibility of what he can learn and achieve given the opportunity he's being given. And something similar like that is happening to Simon. Potentially, he doesn't ever have to die or stay dead, because he will always come back, no matter what happens to him. So, what do you do with that? What would you do with it? What would anybody do with it? But Simon is not the typical superhero journey, because it's in superhero comics, you get powers and abilities, and you either become a hero or a villain. This is not one of those things. It's not suddenly that I'm going to decide to save the world or save even one life. That's just not how he thinks at all, because the only life he's ever been bothered about is his own. But it's not a selfishness, it's just that he's never cared about anybody else. Where there's another immortal involved in the story you'll meet in issue 2, who has entirely the opposite. He's incredibly selfish, but he wants to embrace all of life and have life be his thing to control and own. So he's incredibly rich and incredibly successful, but he no more cares about anybody else than Simon does. It's just that Simon is not really trying to do anything with the gifts he's being given.
The initial first issue is obviously set in revolutionary times. We could see, I mean, good Lord, the name of the character is Redcoat. But also we're dealing with not only historic fiction, but also you guys are putting in a secret cabal that involves, the founding fathers, which is a fun little tick. And I wonder if that cabal will then obviously follow him through the centuries of his life.
Couldn't possibly say. But there is fallout from what happened to him in the 18th century, although the bulk of the first story arc does take place in the late 19th century, in the Gilded Age, because it's quite a fun age to play with. It just verges on being recognizably modern, if you know what I mean, in terms of buildings and lifestyles, and especially if you've got a lot of money. Though I have to say, drawing horses and carriages is a lot more work than drawing a car. It's not the easiest. In fact, I was saying to Jeff, this is probably the hardest I've worked in a very long time, because it apart from the effort I'm going to try and build the worlds visually that we put Simon into, none of that stuff is easy to reference or build or create or do it the way you want it to, because there's just an awful lot less photographic and documentary evidence available. I mean, I've got loads of photos I took of New York every time I go to visit New York, but they're not all by any means suitable, because when you're doing something in the 18th or 19th centuries, there are elements of similarity, but it doesn't really look the same at all. So you can't use those. And we're not doing any modern day setting stories with Simon. We're going to briefly get to the 1950s at the end of this story arc, and we may hit the 1970s at one point. But the fact that he lives, and we know he lives alive in the Geiger period, means we can hop around in the time depending on what stories we want to tell.
That's great, and I do appreciate the late 19th century, the industrial age, because as you say, it is the beginnings of modern society, but we still have a little bit of that like you said, the horse and carriage period.
Yeah.
It's I've watched several documentaries about.
But you've got electric street lighting in some areas of New York, and by the time of 1892, where the bulk of the story is set, you've got the rich folk of the Gilded Age have proper electricity in their houses, and so you begin to see the real, the dawn of the modern age that we can understand. You figure you could go back into that time and it would feel very familiar, at least.
No, that's great, man. In fact, John Rice, was it John Rice Davies? No, it was. I forget his name. The poor actor that has a drug addiction, John Myers. John Myers. And his Dracula, I thought was really interesting because it was that Gilded Age where literally electricity was just starting to happen and everything. And again, the documentaries I saw, like you said, you hear about the Gettys and the Rothschilds and all the families, the Vanderbilts and all, and their influence on society, and also the fact that it really was, because they were so rich, it really was just among them that all these new benefits were happening to. And
absolutely,
everything.
Yeah. It was a very divided society in that respect, and I've got over the years and years, I've accumulated a lot of reference, some terrific books. I've got photos of New York, for instance, going back to the 1840s, where there's still shanty towns in Central Park. So against those kind of backdrops, it makes it the historical fantasy aspect that much more interesting, because how fantasy comics and stories and movies and novels are traditionally set in a historic period. I mean, Terry Pratchett Discworld's film very much like Dickensian periods, but most fantasies have this medieval kind of settings for them. So, but saying this is a historical fantasy, it's not a documentary kind of thing, means that we find the most interesting visual backdrops against which to set this rip-roaring magical adventure, because it has a lot in common with things like the I suppose thematically and intonally with the Downey Sherlock movies, in terms of that slightly steampunk-esque historical take. It just and again with it's like Raiders and Indiana Jones and the Pirates of the Caribbean, that kind of thing. So that's tonally, but at the same time, it's a really fun adventure story. Because of where we're going to take Simon at various periods, there will be some very much darker turns in it, which, again, it's that that roller coaster of emotional journeys that Simon's going to be on.
Mike Jones, interesting question. Any particular historic reference that you enjoyed going through for the series?
Well, any of it, because I love history, and I love world building, and I love the idea of, to put it in movie terms, set dressing and set building, and I love. I didn't like history in school, because in school it was dates and kings and seed drills and that sort of stuff, and I was never that interested in that, because it didn't engage me. What started to engage me was the way history began to be publicly represented on TV programs, which is common enough now, but it was less what happened and more of what it was like to live or be in those times. And it's not just the recreations you get of these time periods. It's the understanding of environmental issues, social issues, ways that help you build the world that you may have lived in had you been alive at that time. And that's much more interesting. I live just outside London. London's always a fascinating place to go into, and just because I suppose I can see the whole periods of history in that, and it always fires my imagination as what it was like. So there's a place, we like Covent Garden. My wife and I, we spend quite a bit of time in the Covent Garden area, in the piazza there, and that has an interesting, and in fact that's going to feature in Simon's backstory, just because it's the thing that I like a great deal. But there was a period when it was first built. It was built essentially for the nobility, for the aristocracy. Only the very rich could afford to live in these townhouses, and the central piazza was a massive garden, and the market piazza wasn't there originally. But within a decade or a couple of decades, it had become essentially the red light district of London, and it was prostitute central, and it had this shanty town market, which was eventually replaced by the piazza. Moll King, for instance, was she set up this sort of shack brothel on the corner by the church, which is by the piazza, and that was there for a very long time. She and her husband made herself very rich doing that. And then within another few decades, it was just the worst of the worst, really. And then you get all the prostitutes are having children, and they're just leaving them on the streets, and that they were the parish records from the church show this. They were called the dropped children because they were just literally dropped and left, and none of them survived more than a few months, but some were baptized in the church, so they didn't have to live with the sins of their parents, but so they're registered in the church, but usually their baptisms and deaths are recorded within the same week or month. So there's a fascinating social record of that stuff. So in terms of what do I like, it's like any of this stuff, because I like the immersion in being able to look at, feel tangibly. In fact, actually, the Covent Garden thing is interesting because the BBC did a documentary on it recently, and as part of their commitment to education and whatnot, they created this virtual space which you can download the information, you can have it on your computer, but you can go and visit it as well. So it's just a room, but it's got the 3D projection. So they done recreation of the Covent Garden Piazza at all these different periods from its inception to present day, and they recreate it in 3D. So you can look around; it moves in real time around you. So you can download that for your computer and see just what it's like. Wow. And it's done at life size. So when you're standing in the room, it feels as big as it would if you were standing there. Although it's obviously a CGI creation, but nonetheless, it gives you a sense of perspective and scale in the different periods. So that's what makes history interesting. So any period where I can do something like that, where I can just get inside it and recreate it, is exciting and challenging.
On the fantasy side, and especially given that you're going to play in the 19th century for a while, is there room for sort of Jules Verne, sort of steampunk gadgetry and vehicles and things like that, or?
I don't see why we can't do a bit of it. I mean, there's magic involved, so there's a bit of kind of get out of jail and do what you like with it. I think super science probably less so, just because I think that will skew what happens in the so-called real world that follows the period of the 19th and early 20th centuries, because that's where some other stories in the unnamed universe are going to take place, and obviously where Geiger takes place as well. So I think if you skew too far from historical reality, I think you especially in the historical stuff, you're going to end up kind of setting a ground that nobody else is going to necessarily be able to play in quite as easily, because I think it's got to look mostly like our world with just a few extra secret bells and whistles in it, like allowing magic to exist. So
I see. And yeah, I mean, obviously you guys from the start, talking to Jeff, talking to Jason Fabic, they're the two that I've talked to mostly about Ghost Machine. This is a very cohesive universe, and I would imagine, are you talking to not only obviously Jeff, who's writing several of these books initially, are you talking to the other artists as well to get a common universe and look on your books?
Well, it's more that we're just in constant contact anyway, because it's the Ghost Machine is less a group of isolated individuals than it is a genuine collaborative team effort on everybody's part. Yes, we all have our own projects to do, but we share everything. We all read the scripts and read the books and share the artwork, and whenever we get together, we have constant Zoom meetings back and forth. Sometimes it's just basically some of us have to discuss business, but then a lot of the time it's collaborative on ideas and just sharing what we're all doing with each other. So it's not like it was at Marvel and DC, because we're all very keen to work together because it's our company, and we all co-own and cooperate it.
I understand. The here, Rich is a man of focus. Interesting name for the contributor here. Will you be taking breaks between arcs to bank issues and keep it on a regular schedule?
Well, I don't need to take breaks and bank issues because I can keep it on a regular schedule. I've been doing monthly books for years now without any problems. So I think only if I'm incapacitated for whatever reason will there be a break, because I can do this monthly book as much as I need to. In fact, I'm trying to get a bit further ahead because there's some other things I need to do on top of Redcoat. But although we may have a guest artist do an annual or a special alongside of it, nobody's touching the monthly book except me, and it will be monthly. So no breaks necessary.
Understood. I know you're in the midst of, and in fact, Magic K wanted to ask you about your Black Label Superman story with Mark Waid, the last days of Lex Luthor.
Mm-hmm.
And I just talked to Mark last week, in fact, and someone was asking about that. Are you able to? I mean, and again, this is great that you're doing this. I'm all for everybody doing creator-owned comics. You've certainly done a lot of work for DC and Marvel in the past. Do you want to balance continuing work with DC and Marvel? I mean, obviously, the Luthor story is a last commitment before Ghost Machine started. And again, these are my words. You can phrase it how you want. But how do you see balancing, or do you want to balance, like I said, DC or Marvel stuff coming up?
Well, I finished the Superman book last year, so at the moment it's just Kevin's inking. In fact, I've got to send him. He's finished issue 2 now, so I've got the issue 3 artwork, which is there. That's all the issue 3 artwork. So I need to send him that next week so he can get started on that. Hang on.
I don't want you to spoil, Brian.
Okay.
Look at this. Oh, that's great, man.
Anyway,
nice.
And the double page spreads are huge. I'm not going to pull those out. Anyway, that's all got to go to Kevin next week to be done. So that answers that question. I finished it months back. April, 6 months ago. So I finished that. So I've been done a while. And in terms of balancing stuff, I have no commitments to Marvel or DC. I mean, the thing is that we're all exclusive to Ghost Machine because it's our company. So why would we want to go and work for somebody else? There's this. It's just, this is where we all want to be doing. If to do the issues of Redcoat that I want to do and the other projects I want to do as well, assuming I don't come up with anything new next week, or Jeff and I don't decide to do something new next week, I'd have to do 16 issues a year for 10 years to do the things I want to do right now. So I have a 10-year plan. It's not 16 issues a year, but I'd like to do. Actually, I'd probably like to do about that starting next year. This year is all just about getting Redcoat well ahead of schedule, so I can start adding a couple of things to the schedule over the next few years. But I'm already planning year 6 right now, so this is at least the next 10 years for me.
Wow, that's great, Brian. Truly, and I'm glad you guys are thinking in those types of long-term goals. B-Flow, if you're able to say, will there be a point where artists trade art duties on your primary books? And if so, who would you like to see within the company take on Redcoat for an issue?
Well, if it's going to be, I think we've all done covers for each other's books. I've got a Rook one to finish for Jay's book. I've done one for Gary's. Gary's done a Redcoat one for me. Jay's going to do a Redcoat one when he's finished his first Rook arc. Francis has done one for all of us as well. So yeah, we'll trade. I think we'll enjoy trading covers, certainly.
Okay.
As much as I'd love to play in their sand pits, the problem I have with that, and it's not really a problem, I suppose, but the thing is that they're their books. And Redcoat's my book. It sounds a bit selfish to say that, but as I said, I'd love to have, if they want to do them, they can do an annual, but they're all going to be busy with their own stuff because they've got their own worlds to build and their commitments to their own books that they're passionate about. but I don't want anybody else touching the monthly book. I want all the monthly issues to be drawn by me. So when we do 60, 100, or 120 issues, and we've got all those collections, all those trade paperbacks, I want it to be every single page to be mine. The way Akira or Walking Dead, that that's the kind of level of, or Savage Dragon, Eric's Savage Dragon work. It's all him, always him, and that's what I want with Simon and Redcoat. I want to tell the whole story.
That's excellent. Viverk has a couple questions. First of all, he says congratulations on the Stormwatch compendium coming out in 2025. Speaking of a long body,
I just found out about that today, actually.
There you go. And he also wants to know what details can you or can't you share on the upcoming Superman movie, given that the Authority connection will be part of it.
I love the fact that you think I might know something, because I actually know absolutely all about it.
Has James even just let you know, hey, by the way, I've got nothing?
No, nothing. In fact, I found out there was an Authority movie the day James Gunn announced all of that stuff, the same time everybody else did. And I made my slightly peeved feelings known to Jim about that. But, I'm not involved with that stuff. I mean, Warren and I do have sort of equity in the Authority. There's a equity thing that DC offer, so character equity. So we do have that. So That's fine, but there's no invitation to be involved at all, at least so far. And I'm not sure I could be anyway, really, time-wise, even depending. But I don't know anything. I have no idea. Sorry.
No, it's all good, man. Let's see. Oh, no, James says, I think he wants to talk to us in general, but what are your thoughts, I think, on the double page spread with digital readers? Do you have any, do you see the transition to just, to present it in a digital form? Has there been any barriers that you see rather than, pages?
To be honest, I've never really thought about the digital stuff. Historically at Marvel and DC, digital has been such a tiny percentage of, genuinely small fractions of what the physical media sells. I'm more concerned about the way double page spreads actually read in large size trade paperbacks and omnibus books. They don't really survive that particularly well either. I like using them because I like wide images rather than tall images. I find the comic page is an odd format, and it probably doesn't really suit a computer screen. I think if I was going to be working on a digital format comic, I would work horizontally. So it's more like a widescreen computer screen. I don't think the two are necessarily easily compatible. And if you're going to be looking at something on a phone, you're going to need to look at it one panel at a time. So every panel is going to be same vertical size or horizontal size. One panel at a time. So on a small phone, you can just flip through. So I genuinely don't think about how the double page spread will be on a computer screen. I assume you would be able to see it as a double screen, because when we look at our PDFs for approval, the option to have them one page at a time or 2 pages, so you can see the double pages. So I kind of assumed that's how it was when you digital form, but I've honestly never read a digital comic, so I don't know how they work.
Well, I get primarily a lot of digital comics, and you're right. And sometimes I forget to have it set for both pages to do the double page effect. So a lot of times it'll just be sliced in half. But as you said, with the phone, that was my concern before the iPad came out, because the convenience of digital comics was great. But I'm like, man, that's really going to kill that wow effect that a double page spread can give you. I also thought, and I'm so glad you were saying this about a horizontal format, that early period in the 2000s when it seemed like a comic suddenly, you did have to flip it over, and you were flipping it this way to get a bunch of double page. I remember Marvel had, I want to say, some X-Men stuff that was formatted like that. Maybe even, well, maybe not. You would know the Ultimates that you did. Were they always just traditional pages and stuff, and then you'd have a double page spread? Because I really think if you were to take a comic book and put it horizontally, it gives you guys a wider canvas to really just tell much bigger pages and bigger effect.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite Frank Miller comics was the 300, but not the way it was printed in original comics. I mean, the trade paper, but the collection, because the double page spreads have been, as they were originally, reduced to just a nice wide screen. And I love that format because that feels more naturally like comics and film combined.
Right.
Because the whole thing with the comic book format is an odd one anyway. I mean, it only is that size because it's half a tabloid newspaper. So all the origin sizes from broadsheet newspapers down to tabloids down to comic book size are all to do with folding things in half, and you end up with that peculiar size because it's a very oddly small format for something that you want to be impressively visual with. At least now, I mean, comics weren't always kind of disposable for a long time, and now they're an expensive hobby, so you market and you want to try and make them as impressive as possible. So but the thing is, that hobby market has an awful lot of very dedicated fans who don't like things oversized, and I find that with the original art market too, because I draw a lot of things bigger sometimes because I like to work slightly larger formats occasionally, especially. But there's a lot of original art collectors who just won't buy anything that isn't 11 by 17. So they don't buy double page spreads unless they fold in half. It's more to do with, I think, their storage capacity. Then some of the Fantastic Four double page spreads I did are the size of a small dining table. So but I think collectors don't like to have their books sticking out on shelves in odd shapes. I kind of like that, but I think I'm an outlier.
I understand. Here, DC Patrol. Some of the best fights I've ever seen in comics come from Batman's grave. Indeed, those images are burned in my mind. Looking forward to having Redcoat burned in my brain as well. Very nice comment. Viverk is back and says, if you can have a second pair of hands, boy, I like this. Would you draw two different comics at the same time, or one but at twice the speed?
Well, I probably do multiple things actually. The thing is, I'm never short of ideas or inspiration, and there's so many stories I want to tell. Simon's especially, but we could spin 3 titles out of Simon's Redcoat quite easily, because it's just although it kind of launched out of Geiger, Simon is this figure that straddles the whole history of the unnamed universe for centuries. So there's so much more you can do with Simon than possibly even his own single series could contain. And then that doesn't allow for the other half a dozen things I want to do. So honestly, if I had more hands and more time, I'd just do more stuff.
Understood. And he sends love from Poland. That's nice. Hey, man, I'm thrilled. This is why I love doing the occasional mid morning or mid afternoon my time talks with European creators, because it does give a chance for the rest of the world to jump in and ask questions and comment, which is terrific. Mike Jones, love Bryan's passion for Ghost Machine and Redcoat and where he wants to take it. Been reading his work since the days of Action Force, Transformers, and Death's Head.
Wow,
tell me about that.
Yeah.
So was Action Force, was that a 2000 AD thing? What was that?
No, Action Force was in the middle late 80s, Marvel UK with Simon Furman and Richard Starkings as editors. They were producing a bunch of weekly comics. Action Force was basically G.I. Joe. It was just their European characters. So the characters that were like Lady Jane and Flint and so on, they were the British characters. So that was my first job, which I got just before I turned 17. I got Richard gave me a 2-parter, an Action Force 2-parter. I found the original artwork for it. It's over there in a bag.
That's great.
So I've got all that. I've got that period. And then I did some Transformers stuff. So that was 87. I was doing that Action Force thing. And then I did the original Death's Head in 88.
What was Death's Head about? I don't know that title.
It was a character Simon and Jeff Sr. came up with in Transformers. He was this bounty hunter that killed Transformers. Kind of goofy looking thing with horns and tusks. But it was an original character. And so they tried to do a couple of American formatted monthly books, one of which was Death's Head. Jeff did the Dragon's Claws one, which is a gladiatorial kind of team thing. And then I did I did Death's Head, or at least a few issues of it. I wasn't really capable of doing a monthly back then. I was only 18.
Sure. Was that Marvel UK or?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I went on from that to do She-Hulk after Byrne left.
Wow. Jesus,
in
that's great.
'89. Yes, I was 19. I was working with Steve Gerber on that.
Oh man, what a singular talent, Steve.
Oh
Gerber.
yeah, he really looked after me as well, which is lovely. He was such a sweet guy. I mean, genuinely sweet. He was over so when we were working on it, it came over to London for one of the UK conventions. I lived in the very far north of England. I was still living in my parents' tiny, terraced house. Gerber got a train up from London just to spend the afternoon drinking two bottles of whiskey and smoking 2 packs of cigarettes, sitting at my parents' dining table, telling me all these amazing stories about comics and movies. And he was the sweetest guy in the world. He was constantly on the phone, just helping me deal with what it was like to do something like that at 19. Really, really nice experience, that part of it.
That's great to hear. Bryan Hitch drew his Hard Time. He was doing it in the 2000s, and told me similar stories about how great Steve was and everything. So yeah, that sounds consistent. That he was always that kind of guy. Stephen Commander, are there still issues of your JLA series that are unpublished?
No, but there are ones I didn't get to finish and didn't get to complete. There are people out there, I think, that liked it. I'm not one of them.
I know, man. We've talked about this before, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm sorry that, I'm sure because you weren't able to do some of the things you wanted to and everything, that it is kind of bittersweet for you.
Well, as I say, I didn't have the experience really to manage the situation as well as I could have or should have, or take advantage of the opportunity as I would now. But you don't learn anything from success, do you?
Absolutely, man. No, you're 100%, and you're right. And more people need to understand that it is good to have those stumbling times, because you learn. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was, but unfortunately, I made all my mistakes on the largest possible canvas there. So, but I think there was a lot of good ideas there. Just weren't many good stories.
I always give it up to you, man. I think your Zod, not Zod, Rao.
The Rao one. Again, it was a great idea, and there was almost a good story there, almost.
Well, again, me and Stephen Commander enjoyed it.
Somebody did.
Absolutely, man. And Stephen says here too that, and I so agree, your Hawkman was amazing. Oh yeah, Vendetti, right? You and Vendetti?
Yeah, and that really only came because Warren was working on Castlevania. I'd drawn issue 1 of Batman's Grave, and Kevin had got that to start inking it. And then Warren called to say there was going to be a short pause between issues 1 and 2, and I said, "How long?" He said 6 months. And so Dan said, "Literally, the only thing I've got today that you can start right now is Hawkman, because that needs an artist." He'd mentioned that a few times, like, "Would you mind doing like the first 2 issues of Hawkman or something?" And I was like, "Well, I can't do Batman now." Anyway, I don't think it was all he had. I think he was just trying to get me to do it. But I'd done the Hawkman found with Jeff Lemire, and although he was never really, only one panel was he in costume there. It was the first time I hadn't doing that Hawkman found was the first time I'd been doing something that wasn't a team book in like nearly 2 decades, and I was amazed at how much quicker it was to draw 1 character in a panel than it was to draw 8. Who knew, right? So anyway, but I really kind of like drawing the Hawkman. I like the wings, and I love Joe Kubert's work on it. And Robert had such an interesting idea. He said, when he said we can do anything, because the idea is simply that Carter Hall is reincarnated across space and time. It's like suddenly, oh God, we can do absolutely anything. with that. And so we did. I honestly, I could have done 50 issues of that book. It was,
Yeah.
yeah. Robert is lovely. And he wrote plots as well, often quite simplified, loose ones. Really, just let me go to town on it, and it was just effortless to work on. But when we started that was a game changer for me in a number of respects. I mean, yes, I'd started to work a lot quicker from around the time I was doing Justice League, because especially there's 2 issues of Justice League in the Rebirth era I'd written for Jose Luis Garcia Lopez to draw. It was a 2-parter, and Jose had agreed to do it, and I wrote the script. And it was going to be a short while before he could get to it, and he needed 6 weeks per issue, which DC initially said he could do. But then, as inevitably happened on that book, another artist started running late on another story arc, and DC like, well, we've got those 2 issues written, we'll just get Joe Friday over there to draw those. And I was like, but I wrote them for Jose, you can't take that away from me. Anyway, in the end, I just said, look, I'm not giving them. They named a couple of guys, and I said, no. 1,000 times no. I said, I'll do them. So I did one of them in 6 days and one of them in 2 weeks. I know, it was ridiculous. And I just thought, holy shit, I actually can do this. I can draw quick and it doesn't suck. So,
well, and truly, Bryan, you've discussed this before on the show. And honestly, it was so great to hear, because I know you did have trouble earlier on in your career with deadlines and things. And truly, you must only be able to see the difference in, laboring over Ultimates pages versus the speed that you were able to find within yourself and everything. Because, again, layman, it's like, well, it's all good to me.
Well, that's nice that everybody feels that way when I've spoken about it. But to be honest, although that Miller put out that the mythology that Ultimates was late because it was good and it was taking time to draw pages, that was not true. That was Mark's kind of public facade taking over his Barnum and Bailey, P.T. Barnum personality and the Stan Lee mythology and all of that stuff. It wasn't true. What was happening was I was having periodic and regular mental health breakdowns. There was undiagnosed bipolar disorder. What they call ASC now, or autistic spectrum condition, is the current medical language for being on the spectrum. It used to be Asperger's or autistic spectrum disorder. Now it's ASC, not ASD, because it's not a disorder. But let's just say neurodiverse is the term that everybody's using. So dealing with a lot of stuff that I didn't really understand or even know was going on until much later, and that period. Just into the late Justice League and starting on Hawkman was when I was diagnosed with bipolar and medicated. So suddenly I could focus properly and for prolonged periods. And it's been an ongoing process to, especially the last year with, I've been in personal therapy for the last 12, 13 months, which, along with everything else has proven to be genuinely transformative. So it's been a journey, but the Ultimate stuff but the discovery was I was always quick. Because if I go back to the earliest days at Marvel UK and so on, initially when I first started drawing, I thought nothing of doing a couple of pages a day or inking 5 pages a day. What happened was that other things started to take over, and self-doubt creeps in, and imposter syndrome, and a whole list of other things, intrusive thoughts, obsessive compulsive disorder, and so on. On Ultimates, there were so many days I just couldn't physically work. I couldn't even pick up a pencil. I'd just stare at the desk all day and then go home. So I think what you're seeing much later on is where I started to be able to deal with and overcome a lot of the stuff that was really holding me back all that time. I mean, I'd love to be able to go back to, from there've been periods where that wasn't happening. You could see that because Authority, that was a terrific year. I was really on top of myself. I seemed not to be that year plagued with any of that stuff. It was a very focused, it was one of the best years until around Hawkman I'd ever had in my career, just in terms I was relaxed, productive, enjoying it, pleased with the results. And I guess not plagued by the same kind of mental health issues that would come back later and were there before. But I've never had the consistency up until the last few years, really. But I think it was always there. It just was buried under an awful lot of other issues.
Well, I'm glad you're working it out and getting the help that that you need to, be able to function. I can appreciate that. And hey, man, well, I mean, forgive me. I don't know the proper words to say, but
it's all right. No, it's fine.
Nobody.
I think it's important to be open about it, and no need to pussyfoot around it or walk on glass about it. It's just is what it is, and everything. Look, I can't complain. This is literally the best phase of my life I've ever had right now. Personally, professionally. I've got nothing to complain about. It's just terrific. I'm loving every day.
That's great, man. That's so great to hear. Here's Stephen, a callback for the Hawkman series, the Adam and Hawkman hug.
Yeah,
iconic to me. Yeah, man. No, they're, again, as you mentioned, Qbert, their long association and stuff. Really, that Vendetti run with you really was great. I mean, to me, the delight was the Hawkman of Krypton.
Yeah.
Friends with Jor-El and everything.
That came up in the initial conversation when Robert said, "Oh, across time and space." I said, "Oh, great! We could do a Kryptonian one then." And so I'm glad we got to do that. But that book was just crazy from start to finish, because when I took it on, as I say, after starting Batman's Grave, I was only supposed to do a few issues. But when I started drawing it, literally the day I picked up the pencil to draw issue 1. It was due at the printers 4 weeks later. So from 1 to 12, it was never, ever anything other than late from day one. And we didn't miss shipping on a single issue over those 12 issues. And I drew all 12, and some of them I did in a matter of days, because there was, holidays that were booked in. So then that was 2 weeks out of my, and I wasn't going to work while I was away. So, it was crazy, but I have nothing but the fondest of memories of that year. And working with Robert was part of that. It was just a really easy collaborative relationship. But I was only supposed to do a few issues, and he just kept going. Warren had started writing Batman again, but we just kept going. And I said, I'll stay until 12. And to be fair, without going into too much detail, the contract that I had for Justice League and Batman, what DC were paying needed those books to justify the returns. So there's no way in the world that a single issue of Hawkman made them any profit, because what they were paying me to do those issues, you needed Justice League sales for that. And nobody ever, I kept waiting for them to say, "No, this is your last issue, this is your last issue." And we got to 12, and Brian Cunningham said afterwards, everybody kept saying that, "No, we can't afford him on it," but nobody wanted to take you guys off it because it was just so nice. Everybody loved reading it in the office. And you think, well, that's, you have to take it, at least give them a bow and an acknowledgement, because there's not many times that happens, honestly, I think.
I get it. No, absolutely, man. And it is, you never know when that gem and that chemistry, the right project, the right team comes through, and you get that. And yeah, it's a shame, because I totally understand the economics of, well, we needed to sell JLA numbers or Batman numbers to justify, somebody's page rate. And it's like, I mean, that's why I'm glad that you guys were able to do that with Hawkman, that Smallwood and Tom King were able to do that with Human Target, because, I mean, you never know where those exceptional, beyond the obvious. I mean, that's the thing. And that's my worry as a reader for DC in particular, when you've got 8 Batman titles and some of the other things that they've got multiple titles. And it's like, man, you really want room for, when Brian Azzarello did Johnny Double, and, just like a little quirky thing like that. Because, yeah, you never know. Now, Vivek says, and maybe this is what I was thinking of when we were talking about widescreen. Yeah, didn't you guys do for what happened to Authority widescreen? I saw a couple link pages, absolutely stunning, and cinematic work. So did any Authority widescreen stuff come out and was published?
No, it was just the stuff that you see. They used it, the images from it, in the Absolute editions as the dust jacket, or the inside, but no, that died because I was halfway through drawing the destruction of New York when the Twin Towers came down, and one of the reactions amongst so many others that day was, well, there's no way DC are going to want this anymore, and that was ultimately proved. I mean, they said, can we change it? Can you do it somewhere else? But by that point, I'd already started gearing up on Ultimates, what became Ultimates. So no, I never went back because there was Marvel I was under exclusive contract to Marvel at that point, but Joe had said, look, finish that story if you like, but we need you to start on the Ultimate Avengers project by this date, so we can make that ship date. So by the time it rolled around, Joe said, look, you really need to start the other stuff. So, it's going to have to be a choice between, and it wasn't really a choice. But I think by that point, especially after that day, there was just no way I really wanted to carry on with it at all. So it was only going to be a short story anyway. It was just, it wasn't going to be a big thing. And I've never felt the need to go back. As much as I would have loved to have done another Authority run, I did bring this up a few times with DC over the last couple of years. Nobody was ever interested.
Interesting. Mike Jones, and I'm putting this up because I love this idea. How tempted were you and Robert to make the Kryptonian Hawkeye the Silver Age Nightwing? Van Z. Oh, I'm a big Van Z fan. Being a Silver
it did
Age
come up actually. We did discuss it. And then we thought about that was our first thing, was would it be him, because that was the kind of a connection for us too. And then we decided to make it a different character because Robert had the idea. Robert was going to be writing Supergirl. I don't know whether he did it or not, but the idea was he was going to bring that character back as her mentor.
Wow.
So that was the long-term plan. I don't know whether it happened or not. I don't know if he did it, but that was certainly that was certainly what he wanted to do.
For people who don't know, Van Z in the Silver Age looked like Superman. Conveniently for Kurt Swan to draw the same head a couple times.
Well, they all look like all Kurt Swan's male heads looked one way, and all it's just the hair colors changed. I love that about it. It made it easier. I love Kurt Swan stuff. I've said this before. He's my foundational influence.
Well, that's amazing, Brian, because then I agree with you. And some fellow podcasters have been down, and they're like, "It's too simple," and it's like, man, you don't know what you're looking at, because
it's distilled simplicity. It's where you take you take it back to only what's necessary, and it's it is over time. But they were the comics that I read growing up. First comics that ever got me interested in what made me love Superman. And whilst Garcia Lopez remains my biggest influence, and Don Newton, Jerry Ordway, all those DC guys growing up, Jim Aparo, my God, they were so good. The thing is, I didn't realize that the Kurt Swan stuff was what I was measuring my stuff against, because I was reading the Kurt Swan stuff when I was seeing Superman the movie, and unlike other sort of more exaggerated stuff, Kurt's people always look natural. They look real. They walked in a real way. Their clothes hung in a real way, and I don't suppose I'd realized until much later that because that was the very first stuff that I'd responded to and fallen in love with comics over. It's probably why I like the other guys as much as I did even coming on, because they had the same stuff, but it started with Kurt Swan for me. And the only other thing that I realized much later as well was that was how much Joe Kubert had influenced me early on without me ever realizing it. So when I was in the early 70s, apart from discovering Superman, the British company was publishing black and white Tarzan comics, and I loved the Ron Ely Tarzan series, and the Johnny Weissmuller movies were on every school holidays, and I used to love watching those. Honestly, I just adored that stuff, and I loved Tarzan almost as much as I loved Superman. But I didn't realize until many, many, many years later, those black and white stories that got me so excited every week with that Tarzan Weekly for the year it ran were Joe Kubert's DC ones, and I've since recollected all of them, but that stuff excited me so much. I copied that stuff as much as I copied all the Superman figures, So it's interesting when you come across the little thing kind of connects, and you think, look at that.
That's great, man. No, and I always point to, regarding Swan, and it's been published on social media many times. Those like rows of Superman faces of his different emotions.
Yeah, they're lovely.
Yeah, I'm like, that's Kurt Swan, man. And if you don't see the genius in the subtlety of how he does each face and everything, it's like, there you go.
I know it's you can see Kurt's influence hugely if you look at I've got them up there, the Rip Kirby books, comic strips, because that's the root of Kurt's the Alex Raymond stuff from that period. But you can also see in Kurt's drawing that so Kurt was doing 5 pages a day because he only worked every other day because he played golf every other day, so he drew 5 pages, played golf. And my hat's off to him. What a lifestyle! I love it. But you think that doesn't bury the amount of ability the man had. I think there's a limit to what you can put on a page if you're going to be doing 5 of them in a day, admittedly. But you can see in the drawing that he was extremely talented and capable.
My favorite Superman artist, and I just like you, man, in that Bronze Age period, reading Silver Age stuff along with the new stuff that he was doing. I was a massive fan. I treated myself for a birthday and bought a Clark and Lois Kurt Swan page because it was affordable. And Tex Blaisdell inked it.
Oh yeah.
It was great. Yeah. So yeah,
my the first inker I saw on Kurt Swan, and he remained my favorite inker, was Bob Oxner. There's a few issues that I got early on as a kid, and I just loved Bob's big lines on that stuff, and it just never looked right to me when Bob Oxner stopped inking it. And then you got Frank Shiramonti. He was fine, but it wasn't Bob. It was a much finer line. And then at the end of that run, they had those terrific issues that Al Williamson inked over him. And because, of course, Al was hugely influenced by the same Alex Raymond stuff. So it was just a marriage made in heaven as far as I was concerned. But then Al obviously went off to Marvel with his contracts at Marvel to do various things, including, Daredevil with Johnny. But those few issues, I think Paul Neary knew Al really well. So, he'd said that, he would have loved to have spent, the rest of his life inking those Superman pages over Kurt Swan. But,
No, and then we also got that great, I think the Marvel movie adaptation of the De Laurentiis Flash Gordon is so superior to the film itself.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
And it's because of Al. Yeah, man.
Yeah, it's up on the shelf, yeah. Yeah, we've got some books up there, like some of the Warren stories that Al Williamson did. There's one called Homecoming, just about this guy who goes off in a spaceship and he comes back, and every time he arrives back, he's arrived on an alternative Earth because he can't find his way back to the one he started off. But the drawing in it is just gobsmackingly gorgeous. Probably some of the most beautiful illustrations ever put in a comic ever. And there was another one with I have to think about it. I can never remember his name, but it's the guy. It's not Dover Spargill. That was something else. But he's this guy who plays a comic strip artist, and he farms out all of his work to other people without them knowing that he's doing it. So he only ever rolls up the panel borders. And he has somebody else ghost write it, somebody else ghost pencil it, and somebody else ghost ink it and letter it, and he just does the panel borders, but he takes all the money, and then they all then he kills them all and draws one of it in their blood or something, and then the zombie versions all come back and kill him. But it's just absolutely extraordinary artwork. It's just really, really terrific.
That's awesome, man. HR agrees with you when it comes to Bob Oxner, absolutely. And David,
Kevin Nolan's biggest influence is actually Bob Oxner.
Oh, I never realized that. That's fantastic, man. I got to get Kevin back on the show. I've only had him on once, and it was a panel that I was doing online for Baltimore, and I really enjoyed talking to him. And we're patient. Don't worry, Kevin, with the last days of Lex Luthor. It's a great story. I'm very excited to see the finish, and I really think the three of you are bringing a piece of your best work on that.
Honestly, it's a fantastic story. I can't emphasize enough that it was such a terrific story. I feel really honored to have got to pencil it. I'm sandwiched between a couple of real greats on it, admittedly, but yeah, Mark's stories really. I don't think I know anybody else who understands Superman quite as well as he does. I would have loved to have done a proper, Superman run with Mark on the regular title, in another life. But it's but for my last work for hire job, to go out with the character that brought me into it in the first place just seems, unintentionally, but seems somewhat correct.
I love it, man. No, absolutely. David, and I agree with you, David. I love Hitch's work, talking comic stuff on a Monday. What a way to start the week. Yeah, man, we're lucky for today. And I hear you. James wants to know who you would want a How to Draw book by. So what artist would you want to see do a How to Draw book?
Well, it's going to be all the guys I grew up with, because I mean, I know a lot of the current guys, or I can pick up the phone or email them and we can all have a chat about how we all do it. And that's kind of a bit like cheating, I suppose. So growing up, I suppose I would have loved to have seen kind of behind the curtain on all those guys I talked about. I mean, I kind of know Jose a little bit, and Jose is going to be doing some covers for us too, which is lovely, because
wonderful,
absolute genius. But I would have loved to have kind of sat down with guys like him, and especially Don Newton. Don Newton was because I've spoken, a long time ago, but I've spoken to Jerry Ordway. I got to know Neil Adams a bit, and so I think anybody that I really would like to kind of break it all down for me and see process by, it would have been Don Newton, because Don I think is the unsung hero of the 80s, as far as I'm concerned. And Don inspired and influenced me almost as much as Jose did growing up.
That's great, man, and I'm with you on Don Newton. And I forget what those hardcovers that DC released of various artists, and there is a Don Newton book.
There is. I've got it. Yeah, it's up there. But I've still got all the original. I would never throw that stuff away, because they're the stuff I can pull it down. All those comics from that period, and it reminds me why I'm inspired to draw comics. It's not that I want to draw like them necessarily anymore. It's just that it reminds me how I felt when I read them, and what I want to try and capture in my work now is how I felt when I read that stuff, not how it looked, but how I felt reading it, and how inspired and enthusiastic and impassioned I was to start drawing.
Your evening started. Did I promise to keep you at around an hour, or
you did? Because I'm gonna have to go and cook dinner for the family.
Okay.
So we can start wrapping it up.
Absolutely, man. No. And I again, I know it's evening your time, and it's I don't want to mess up your schedule.
That's all right. Usually we run to do about 2 hours, but
well, because I usually bother you about Doctor Who and Star Trek.
Star Trek, yeah. Don't start me on all of that now.
I won't.
I do a separate one for one of those ones.
We could email each other our thoughts on current Star Trek. That's okay. Oh, HR again adds to the list. Alex Toth, Jim Aparo, of course.
Yeah, Aparo. There was a thing that used to happen in the UK. So we get these annuals at Christmas, and they would reprint stuff from. So they're large format hardcover, and I can't remember the name of the company that did it though. But they used to reprint, for a while at least. They reprinted classic DC comics in magazine size books and annuals in black and white. So for me as a kid, getting that stuff, and you'd see these Jim Aparo Brave and the Bold stories, but you'd see them in black and white, and you could see just how much black he used and the rendering. God, I loved that stuff. That was just great. It didn't last. I think it was called Superhero Monthly, and it was a magazine format, and they printed Kurt Swan, Murphy Anderson, Superman stuff. They'd print. There was a Jose Luis Garcia Lopez Christmas story with the Legion of Superheroes and Superboy, which I've still got. But having all that stuff in black and white for somebody who wanted to be an artist meant you could actually see the inks on the page, not just the inks and the colors. It was a different thing. But that was the Jim Aparo stuff I remember specifically from that, because it's just the way he used blacks on a page is fantastic, really.
I hear you, man. And also, a lot of those annuals would have prose stories with spot illustration and stuff, and you get early like Alan Moore and other British
Yeah.
writers doing those text, those prose stories and stuff. So yeah, God, man, you are like so scratching the itch of a lot of the people in the chat right now. Yeah, so they're all coming out and agreeing with you on that. So very cool. Well, Brian, you've been great with your time as always, and I'm really happy for you guys. And Redcoat is a fantastic
Thank
uh,
you.
part of Ghost Machine, and it's an intriguing first issue. And I think people are going to really be excited for what's in store for the character and then for the story in general. So well done, and as always, I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming back. And
Always a pleasure, John. Always.
well, I feel the same way, man. So have a good evening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. See you again soon.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, for watching. I'm going to come back later tonight. Michael Jan Friedman is going to join me and talk about. He's got a new card game that he's kickstarting, so he wants to talk about that. And I will bug him for Star Trek stories because, given the dozens of stories that he's written for Star Trek over the years in comics and books, so expect that later on today. Thanks a lot for watching. Everybody, stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.